All right, so we are looking at functional classification of the nervous system. Functionally, the nervous system can be classified into two types. We have sensory nervous system and motor nervous system. Again, sensory means incoming information. Motor is outgoing. So I'll draw a little picture here. So this is your brain, spinal cord, right? Information coming towards the brain and spinal cord. So this is sensory. Information coming towards the brain and spinal cord. And remember, these informations are transmitted or carried towards the central nervous system via the receptors, right? There are receptors all over the body that carries the sensory information towards the brain and spinal cord. Okay, so that's sensory, incoming information. Motor is outgoing. So the information goes to the brain and spinal cord. Your brain and spinal cord decides, they are the decision maker, right? They decide what action to take and sends out a command. This is motor. So the outgoing command is called the motor nervous system, and the command can go to skeletal. Oops. What happened here? The command can go to, why cannot I draw? Can go to, man, what's wrong? Can go to skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, glands, cardiac muscle, and adipose tissue. I would also add adipose tissue here. Okay, so these are the effectors. What are they called? These are called effectors. Effectors are the structures that receive the motor command. So your brain and spinal cord is sending out the motor command, telling the skeletal muscles to contract. So the skeletal muscle is an effector which is contracting based on the command coming from the brain and spinal cord. Does that make sense? Your gland, let's say your sweat gland. Your gland is secreting sweat based on the command that's coming from your brain. Your brain is giving a command to your sweat glands to sweat out. So you sweat out. Okay, so these are the effectors in blue. And remember, your central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, those are the decision makers. Okay, so do we understand sensory and motor here? I hope we do. Now, sensory can be of two types. We have something called somatic sensory. And then we have something called visceral sensory. Let's talk about somatic sensory first. Somatic sensory information are sensory information that we are very, very aware of. For example, right now, I'm sitting in, it's Sunday morning, I am sitting in my room, hiding away from Rian. So I am hiding in a room and I can see it's cloudy, the weather is bad, it's Easter, kids cannot do anything. So, okay, so these are the sensory information. I can see, right, that it's cloudy. I can see there is no sunlight. I mean, there is sunlight, but it's not bright sunlight. So my eyes are carrying this information to the central nervous system, and my brain is interpreting all the incoming information and saying, it's a bad cloudy day. Okay, so somatic sensory neurons are the neurons that carry sensory information. For example, another example would be, I can feel the temperature of the room, right? I know it's good temperature. It's probably set at 72, 73 degrees. I like it. So that's a sensory information about temperature being carried towards the central nervous system, right? So these are somatic sensory, the one that we can feel and we are aware of. So it's sensory information coming from, so the information comes from special senses: eyes, nose, ear, tongue, skin. So it comes from special senses. Information comes from skin, fascia, skeletal muscles, etc. So these are somatic sensory. We are aware of all these. Visceral sensory, now we don't understand this, we don't realize this, but your central nervous system is always and always receiving sensory information from your viscera. What do we mean by viscera? Viscera are the internal organs and structures. For example, our central nervous system is always receiving sensory information about our blood pressure, body pH, heart, cardiac output, and so many other things, body temperature. We are not aware of this, right? We are not aware that our sensory nervous system is receiving sensory information about heart rate, breathing rate. Those are visceral sensory. Remember, we are not always aware of these. And sensory information comes from viscera. Sensory information from viscera. We are not aware of these all the time. Okay. Moving on to the motor division. Let's see, it's a different color. Two types of motor. First, we have somatic motor, meaning the command. So in case of somatic motor, we have the brain and spinal cord, and the command comes out and goes to skeletal muscle. That's somatic motor. When the command goes to skeletal muscle, that's somatic motor. And we can control our skeletal muscles, right? You can control it. So this is very, very voluntary. The other one is autonomic motor. And in case of autonomic motor, the command comes out from the central nervous system and goes to cardiac muscle in your heart, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle that lines the organs, cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, glands of your body, and adipose tissue. These are the effectors in case of the autonomic nervous system. Now, autonomic is automatic or involuntary. We cannot control this. The heart is innervated by autonomic nervous system. So let's say when we are this close to an accident on the freeway, what happens to our heart rate? It paces up, right? Suddenly it paces up and it remains in that state for like few minutes. Can you control that? Can you decide, okay, I'm not letting my heart pace up? We cannot do that because it's autonomic, it's involuntary, right? So the autonomic nervous system controls all these cardiac muscles, then smooth muscles. So we have smooth muscles in our GI tract, which are innervated by the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system signals the GI tract to contract and relax so the food can get digested and the food moves through our GI tract. Similarly, your glands are controlled by the autonomic nervous system and also adipose tissue. I hate this. I would very much like the adipose tissue to be somatic motor so we can control it, right? And depending on whether I'm going for a run or if I'm going for a fancy party, I can actually decide where to put the adipose tissue. Unfortunately, we cannot do that. Okay, so let's take a look. So functional classification of the nervous system, we do see two components, sensory and motor nervous system. Sensory, remember, it receives information, incoming or receiving information. Motor is outgoing or sending command. Sending command. Okay. So if you look at the sensory nervous system, it is made up of the receptors that carry the information towards the central nervous system. We have two types of sensory nervous system, or sensory nervous system can be divided into two components. We have somatic sensory, which we are very much aware of, and in this case the sensory information comes from our special senses like ear, eyes, nose, tongue, skin, skeletal muscles, joints, skin, superficial fascia of the body. Then we have visceral sensory, where the sensory information comes towards the central nervous system from the viscera, and we are not always aware of these. Looking at the motor nervous system, we have somatic motor, where the command goes to skeletal muscles, and this is very, very voluntary. We can control it. Autonomic motor refers to the motor command going to cardiac muscle, smooth muscle glands, and adipose tissue, and we cannot control this, and that therefore we call it the autonomic process or involuntary process. Okay, we did talk about this on slide 1, but let's review this one more time. If you think of the nervous tissue, it's made up of two types of cells. We have the long neurons and the supporting smaller glial cells. Neurons are electrically excitable, as we mentioned before, meaning they can initiate, transmit, and receive nerve impulses. Also, we did mention that neurons are non-mitotic. So if a damage occurs to the neuron, the neuron cannot repair itself. So it cannot divide. Then we have glial cells. These are supporting cells. They cannot be excited ever. However, they do divide by mitosis. Okay. A few other things about the neuron. We discussed the anatomy. Now we know that neurons are active cells. What happened? Are you sad? What? Did Daddy say something? No, you are a very good boy. Come to mommy. Come to mommy. Okay, you are a very good boy. Okay, let me finish this up. So neurons, they have high metabolic rate, meaning they are very active, and since they have high metabolic rate, obviously they need to have a lot of organelles in the cell body. That's what we see. If you look at the cell body, you do see the organelles in pink and purple. So neurons have high metabolic rate, high energy demand. They live long, so they have extremely long lifespan, and as I mentioned, they are non-mitotic. Okay, I will stop. Oh, actually, let's finish this. I have time. So this is the cell body of the neuron. The cytoplasmic extensions are the dendrites, and this long extension starting from the cell body is the axon. The junction between the cell body and the axon is called axon hillock. Remember, this is where the action potential actually starts. And the axon hillock then transmits the nerve impulse towards the axon, or away from the cell body, as we might call it. Okay, these are the axon collaterals. These are side branches of the main axon. At the distal end, we do see the telodendria. These are the branches. And then the synaptic knobs are these bulbs at the very, very end. These are synaptic knobs. It is from these synaptic knobs that neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic cleft. Okay, I'll stop here and then move.